Okay. Well, welcome to on your schedule. It says the United Nations. I think it's in How to Get Out. And last year, Reverend Kraft gave a talk on the UN, and he said something like, "Who is the founder of the UN?" And I think he said, "The devil." Well, I'm not going to dispute that one bit because that's the case. I'm going to go into more of the mechanics of how he used humans to create the UN, but also what you can do, because I'm going to talk about the UN that may be in your town, in your city, and what you can do. All right? So, the name of Agenda 21 in the ICLEI. ICLEI is an acronym that stands for International Council on Local Environmental Initiative. But first I want to go into a little bit about the background of the UN. Here is the headquarters of the United Nations in New York City on the East River. Some people call it the house that Hiss built. And we'll tell you who Hiss was. The property that the UN is sitting on was given to the UN by John D. Rockefeller Jr. of the famous Rockefeller family, or should I say infamous. The founding acting secretary was this man, Alger Hiss. Who was Alger Hiss? Well, he came from a relatively wealthy background. He was not some poor, downtrodden individual living in the slums of New York that was exploited all his life. He was a man of privilege. He went to a Ivy League college where he became a Communist Party member and an agent for Joseph Stalin. Who was Joseph Stalin? Perhaps the bloodiest monster of the 20th century. Mao, Hitler, and Stalin are sort of vying for that title. Probably Mao got it. Hitler was a distant third. But this man worked for him, and he knew all about him. There was a book called Witness that exposed this man by a former communist that knew him. Okay, he wrote the charter of the UN. And you take the charter of the UN and you take the Constitution, diametric opposite documents. The UN Charter gives rights and then takes them away. You understand that? When we say we have a Second Amendment right to do something, to own a gun or protect ourselves, the Second Amendment didn't give you that right. That Second Amendment was there to protect a right. The UN Charter will give a right. You know, in the UN Charter, you have a right to vacation. Well, that sounds good, doesn't it? Boy, you wouldn't want, you'll have a job, you want to go on vacation. But then they take that right away. So when member nations, like Russia or China, can persecute their citizens, and the UN will say, unless they have a law against it, and that's okay. You see? You can look at the charter yourself. And in fact, I put it up on my script page, and you should look at it, so you can defend the position, okay? Now, we're told that the UN is a humanitarian organization. They feed thousands all over the world. They're bringing peace to the world. It's a peacemaking organization, right? Well, let me say this to you. There was a book called Death by Government, written by a man named Professor Rummel, who was a liberal professor from Hawaii. And he said that more people are killed by governments in the 20th century during peacetime. And most of those governments are members in good standing at the UN. Okay? Here's an example of the peace that the UN brings. Here are two men, two soldiers. You see the pigmentation of their skin? They're white men, right? You see the man they're torturing? He's from Somalia. The UN went into Somalia because the country was sort of imploding, and because the leader wasn't being a supporter of the UN, they ended up killing him. Right? Did you read about this? Well, some of you are kind of young, but some of you older folks. You remember seeing this on your news? You remember Rodney King? How many times did you see Rodney King, those of you who are old enough to remember? Time and time and time again, right? And maybe it should have been shown time and time again. Did you see this? And that's just one example of many examples. Okay? Actually, it was the Village News, which is a very left-wing newspaper in New York City that started this. We picked it up from them, believe it or not. Okay. But the UN loves, it's a peaceful organization. And they use persuasion to bring peace. This is on the internet, by the way. This is something that, you know, you can find this anywhere. Here's a UN soldier bringing peace to a beleaguered nation, third world nation, you see. Yes, I guess I'd be very peaceful if someone put a gun to my head and told me I should be a UN supporter. Well, no, I would say no, but... All right. Now, Agenda 21. Now, let me, for those of you learning about this for the first time, this question might seem a little bit odd. But if I was to tell you that a UN occupational army was coming to your town or your city, what would you do? You know, this is, yeah, well, I would think most of us, well, some of us say, that's never going to happen, Mr. Shurtleff. That's really weird. That's wild. And maybe it will never happen. Okay? Most of us would say, we'll resist whatever means possible, right? But if I told you it was already there, what would you say? Okay? And they're not occupational soldiers. And how they get there? It wasn't Kofi Annan or Ban Moon or President Obama that brought him in there. It was your town selectman. It was your town manager. It was the land trust people. It could have been the person that was your babysitter growing up. Maybe your Sunday school teacher. Maybe the person that's in your church or in your school. They're the ones that brought it in. And how do they do that? Through something called Agenda 21. Back in 1992, there was a very large meeting in Rio de Janeiro, South America. 35,000 bureaucrats from all over the world met. And their goal is a one world government. Okay? And they came out with this document called Agenda 21. It was over 1,000 pages long. And President Bush, the Republican, we're talking about the father, signed it. He said, he uses, I'm quoting him, paraphrasing him. He said the American people will adopt the ideals enshrined in the UN Charter. Isn't it interesting? The supporters of the UN use the word enshrine when they talk about the UN. You ever hear them say their principles enshrined in the Constitution? Never hear it from a George Bush or a Bill Clinton. Okay, this is a map. There's a friend of mine who actually spoke at this camp some years ago. Wildlands map. This is the United States, as you know. Hopefully all of you know. And you see where the red is? The dark red here? These are areas that, if they're successful, will become completely unusable for human beings. Yes, we have to bring back the birdies and the trees and everything else. And by the way, if you were sitting here 100 years ago, right, this would be all cleared. You'd be almost able to see Mount Monadnock without any trees in the way. Why was that? Because it was clear cut. New Hampshire was about, what, 20% deforested, maybe even more, by 1900. And guess what? It's all back. It's been completely reforested. Okay? And that's happening all over the country. All right? And I don't want anyone leaving this class saying, Mr. Shurtleff says it's okay to kill trees and birds and animals. No. We have to be good stewards of this planet. Be good stewards of everything that we have. But this stewardship is one thing, but worship of animals is another. Okay? And there are people who do that. Pantheistic types. Okay? You see the yellow spots? Those are buffer zones. And you can't see the black spots too much. Those are the where the populations will live. And this is what Agenda 21 is about. It's about relocating people, getting them out of the rural areas, putting in concentrated areas. Some of you people might have seen these high-rises, or maybe it was an old factory in your town, and the factory's now a real, it's a housing unit for like 1,000 people. It's called Stack 'em and Pack 'em, okay? And if you were trying to open up a factory that made something, a building that was 100 years old, oh, there's all kinds of hazardous waste, you can't get a permit, it's going to cost you $1 million to clean it up, because I've known people who told me that. I know Mr. Wyatt, Mr. Wyatt can relate to that. But if you were a developer, and you were a green developer, you put the word green on something, you're going to get that contract, right? From the, oh, green, green, green. You don't have to worry about all the hazardous waste. We'll just give you the permit. And you can build these Section 8 housing. It means the government's going to pay for it. You can stack people in it, get them out of the rural areas, get them in, and put it right by a commuter rail so they don't have to go too far. That's the goal. Now, What makes it worse, no, begin with, who has their Constitution with them? Anybody? Okay, look up Article 1, Section 10. And read where it says something about what states can't do. That's where the states were forbidden to do certain things. The state of New Hampshire cannot declare war against Mexico. They probably win, but they can't do it, right? They can't. States cannot confederate. Each town or county or city in a state is a subdivision of that state, a corporate subdivision. So the town of Ringe cannot have contracts with other governments, foreign governments, right? Or the city of Boston, or the city of Keene. But under this ICLEI, International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives, is a government-to-government organization, okay? It has private members, but cities and towns belong. And Keene, New Hampshire, just about 20 miles from here, is a member of that, all right? What makes it worse is that the federal government, and in some cases state governments, are paying these towns and cities to become part of an international organization. So this is what they're doing, folks. They're taking your tax money and they're using it to bribe your elected officials to pass rules and regulations that will destroy your rights in your town and city. Okay? Now here, Dedham is a town just outside of Boston, not too far from, I'm just a few miles away. And I've been going to these town halls. You see, we're activists. We're constitutional activists. We don't just learn about stuff, sit on our hands, and ain't it awful? That's too bad. It can't be done. Nothing you can do about it. It was all, you know, we don't believe that. The state of Massachusetts, environmental entity arm, gave the town of Dedham $179,000 to implement Agenda 21 in their town, right? That means you put on smart meters on your house, so the government knows how much electricity you're burning, and you'll be told you're burning too much. What's going on? We got to find out. Is that what freedom is about? No. Oh boy, you own an acre of land and you got a newt on that, a spotted newt. There's a man in Santa Rosa, California, that county. He was a farmer. He found a spotted newt, and this was the first county in the United States that brought. This is like the test market. So he thought he was being a good citizen. You know, hey, I got this spotted newt, I got to go and show whatever it was. And they said, oh, endangered species. Guess what? He lost his farm, he went bankrupt, and he died pretty distraught because he couldn't do anything on his land because of the spotted newt. But guess what happened? A land trust. You know what a land trust is? A land trust is a group of people that form an entity, and they will divide land and set it aside. No, I'm not against land trust per se. But these land trusts are using Agenda 21 to get land 10 cents on the dollar and take it out of circulation. Now you have a farm or you have a building, you take it out of circulation, the tax base of that town goes down, doesn't it? Right? You don't have as much revenue. That means they raise your taxes. Or they give you more tickets. You know? They're a lot more aggressive lately, by the way, okay, when it comes to tickets. Or, let's say, oh, okay, you're going to lose your tax base, but we're going to give you a big fat check every couple of years. We're going to take your money, give it to the state and federal governments to give it back to your town. So they would implement laws that will, or rules or ordinances that will destroy your freedoms. Mm-hmm. Sounds like a deal, doesn't it, huh? Okay? Let's see what else we have here. Yeah, here's the town of Marshfield, Massachusetts. Marshfield is a place where my ancestors settled in the 1640s. So we have a rich history there. They're a member of ICLEI. I was in there with Mr. Moore. It was a very interesting experience because we want to see who's behind this, you see. The average person doesn't even have a clue. We met a man that was running for state rep. He was a taxpayer party, something like that. You thought he knew everything was going on. Hadn't a clue. Well, I went into the town manager's office, and it was being very polite. And I said, I have something on the job. He said, why do you think I'm interested in that? I'm not interested in that. I said, well, Marshfield's up. Well, I know what Marshfield is. I'm not interested in it. Okay. Well, I got his name, went on the internet. Aha. Now I know why ICLEI is in Marshfield, because this guy is an internationalist. He's a town manager, and he's getting paid by the town. He's getting money for the town to implement this stuff here. Okay. You see the terms not wise use, but you see green, you see sustainable. You know the term sustainable? Do you know farms aren't sustainable? Hydroelectric power, according to Agenda 21, is not sustainable. We talk about alternative energies to fossil fuels, right? So what's wrong with harnessing water? We've been doing it for hundreds of years. That's unsustainable. In fact, there's a water, just in Massachusetts, not far from here, they're going to tear it down. Why is it unsustainable? Because the fishies can't get up there. Because they build bridges. You see these salmon bridges that work quite well. They do a great job, and they bring a lot of these native fish back. But it's not sustainable. We've got to tear it down. Okay. Oh, by the way, green jobs. You hear a lot about green jobs. For every green job created, 3 so-called non-green jobs are taken away. Do the math. Do the math. How long are you going to be a prosperous nation? I'll tell you about green technology. Our governor of Massachusetts, Deval Patrick, is a big advocate of green technology. $65 million of the taxpayers' money went to a company just about maybe 25 miles from here to make windmill blades, right? For 5 years, they set up shop, employed 500 people, and probably paid a good wage. The company announced just recently, guess what, folks? We're going to set up shop in China. Thank you very much for giving us the startup money. That's where your green jobs are going, to China. Okay? And windmills have their problems too. They can only provide, probably if we were to maximize their use, maybe 2 or 3% of all of their energy needs. Okay, now, I'm more interested, I do have a printout, that was a reprint from the New American Magazine, and I just want to share one of the supporters of this. Now, we use the word conspiracy once in a while, and that means when 2 or more people do something and their intentions aren't completely known. This is being promoted everywhere. If you go to a public school, it's promoted in the public school. Private school, you watch TV programs, green, 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 everywhere you go, okay? And I'm not, again, I love gardening, I love the woods, I'm not against green per se, but it's being used, I think it's going to be overused, and I'm thinking they're overplaying their hand. And by the way, Al Gore is one of the biggest champions of green, global warming, and we're going to have an instructor here tomorrow talking about the fraud of global warming. He's a billionaire. He made $1 billion. His father was a U.S. Senator also from Tennessee. And there's a man named Armand Hammer that was, he was sort of the man he propped up. Armand Hammer was an oil man, a real wicked man too, by the way. He set up shop in the Soviet Union, he knew about the slave labor, the graphite mines, he didn't care. He was a Republican, officially, but he was the biggest communist supporter of the Soviet Union. Okay, he was sort of Al Gore's father was a big supporter of his, and when he left the Senate, he ended up working for Armand Hammer. Al Gore owns mines that were from Armand Hammer. Okay, so Armand Hammer made him very wealthy. And Armand Hammer was an oil man. What do oil people do? They dig oil. They use fossil fuels, right? So their wealth is on fossil fuels. So I'm trying to say is, I would say he's a hypocrite, but I don't use the word hypocrisy. He's a determined agent of this New World Order. So the rules that apply to us don't apply to him. Okay? Well, one of the advocates of this Agenda 21, he used to work for the Clinton administration. Let's see what his name is. They're always having meetings, by the way, all the time. These secret meetings. His name was J. Gary Lawrence. He was an advisor to Bill Clinton. And he was in London, the future of local Agenda 21. And he said, in some cases, LA, local Agenda 21, is seen as an attack on the power of the nation state, which of course it most definitely is, as we will show. So he's admitting that this is what we're trying to do. No problem, this is what we're trying to do. Then he said, participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many of the conspiracy-fixated groups and individuals in our society, such as the National Rifle Association, citizen militias, and some members of Congress. This segment of our society who fear one world government and a UN invasion of the South United States, to which our individual freedom would be stripped away, would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined the conspiracy. So here's a man admitting that that's their goal, and there's going to be opposition. What do they do to the opposition? They like to ridicule it, don't they? You know, I'm on Facebook a lot with this information. Braintree, Massachusetts has this Braintree global carbon footprint stuff. And a lot of people have been posting information about this, and someone got back and said, oh, don't tell me a farmer's market is a conspiracy. They're ridiculing. So we say, no, farmer's market isn't a conspiracy. But the Agenda 21, and a conspiracy is something done in secret. But the problem is, it's well known, but for a few examples, the media doesn't do a whole lot with this. I've had numerous letters to newspapers, and only one of them in the last 2 or 3 months has run a letter on the subject. So what I do is I go to the Facebook page, and every newspaper has a Facebook page, and I post the stuff up there. So at least and they leave it up there for a few days. So you just click like, post, click, bing, go up there. Not as good as a letter in the newspaper, but it helps. Okay, now, I don't know how many of you work with your parents or are activists or want to be activists, but let me show you an activist, okay? So don't you tell me there's nothing I can do about it. I can't do anything about it. You can't fight City Hall. It's going to happen anyway. I know this person. I know her quite well. In fact, I've known her since she was born. There it is. This is in the town of Dedham, Massachusetts. I'm sorry, I didn't put my speaker in. You recognize that little girl with all that hair? You're in Dedham on Flag Day, where thanks to Mr. Moore recommended we do that. And she's passing out this flyer. Now, who can resist a 6-year-old cute girl like that?
I know.
Right? And she's just saying, are you from Dedham? Yes. And she hands him the flyer, right? Can any one of you do something like this?
No.
Can any of you do this?
I've done something like that before.
Okay.
And people just look at me and walk away.
Let them walk away. Your job is to get the message out, right?
They just like give me this look.
You're going to get that look, but you know, for every 100, if you get 2 people out of 100, you've succeeded.
Don't worry where they look.
And that's a lot of fun too, isn't it? Right?
You should drop some.
I recognize this way too.
Okay, now, let me explain to you what's happening, how you can solve the problem, okay? Since this issue has come up, maybe since this past year or so, it's been getting a lot of attention. Glenn Beck mentioned it. You know, when Glenn Beck mentions something, all of a sudden it becomes important, right? How did he mention it? Because people told him about it. Now, since May of this year, the city of Edmond, Oklahoma got out of Agenda 21, ICLEI. How did they do that? Because the activists in their towns did that. Several counties in Maryland, a county in Virginia just recently pulled out. The state of Maine, we had some members of the John Birch Society and other freedom people met with the governor, 30 people, and they handed him information on this subject. The next day there's a press release or a news conference. The state of Maine, the governor of Maine, the state of Maine will not fund Agenda 21. Isn't that wonderful? You're supposed to clap when you hear news like that. Activists do things. We've been on this issue since May. I've made a lot of friends on the subject. I mean, I posted this in Carver, Massachusetts, is cranberry country, not quite Cape Cod, but close to it. They belong to this. I went on their Facebook page. So what's in Carver? Okay, Carver GOP, Republican Party. Click. Oh, there it is. Like. Click. I posted videos and these articles on their page, and I suggested they make an issue out of it. Well, a lady that is the head of the party in that town, and the founder of the Plymouth Tea Party, Lisa Martin. She knew nothing about the subject. She read this article that I posted on the web from front to cover. She's becoming a one-woman army. I've got about 5 speaking engagements on this subject all over the state because of that one little click and paste, cut and paste, okay? She's been informing people in her circles. A lot of the Tea Party groups are talking about this now. And she said to me, I knew nothing about this till I read it. It explains everything that's going on in Carver. And a week later, she was able to shoot down one of the ordinances that would have been passed as a Agenda 21. And a town in Newburyport is another place, and they told me in the last couple of weeks that Newburyport got out. I'm waiting for official documentation. So there's a lot of things you can do. Learn about the subject, and when you hear this stuff in school, question it. Teacher says, oh, we have to go green. We want to see beautiful. We don't want to see this become a parking lot with a bunch of condominiums, but the towns and the counties are the ones who should take care of that. The people who live in those areas know best, I would think. The people who own that property. And by the way, if you think the UN knows how to take care of property, you remember hearing about the rainforest deforestation down in South America? Back in the 90s, you might have heard about it. Oh, it's terrible. They did. Well, where did that money come from to clear cut those forests? If you said UN, you would be correct. The money came from the United Nations, one of the import-export banks, and the World Bank and so forth. And the experts down there said, you can't do this because the soil will not sustain crops very long. So the locals said, no, it won't work. It's not good farmland. But the money, the international money said, do it. Then they came back and said, we need to have a world entity to prevent this type of thing. When they're the ones that started to begin with. Okay? There's a treaty now that's trying to be debated, the Law of the Sea Treaty. Will give the UN complete jurisdiction of the world's oceans. And they don't tell me there's a world government in the making, you know? Now, I know fishermen in Maine, I know fishermen in Massachusetts, in Gloucester. Some of these folks have been, their families, 10, 12 generations. I would like to think they know more about fishing and preserving the fishing stock than anyone at the UN does. Than Maurice Strong. I may be a little silly to think that. In fact, back in the 70s, the Russian trawlers would come in, the fishing trawlers, and take everything. We had a 12-mile limit. By the time the law was passed to have a 200-mile limit, the few times you need a law was to get passed, they don't want to pass it. But by the time the 200-mile limit was passed, 90% of the stock was wiped out. It's coming back slowly. No thanks to our friends in Russia, no thanks to our friends in Congress, but it's the fishermen themselves. They know how to fish, they know how to preserve the stock. It's like a farmer. A farmer's not going to destroy his soil. He knows he's going to use it time and time again. They know how to rotate things like that. They know a lot more about it than the UN bureaucrats do. Okay, so I'm not going to hand this out to everybody because some of you don't want it. But I have plenty of these. If you live in a town and city, if you don't know it, I can probably help you out. If you want to take an active role in this, we'll be glad to help you. Are there any questions? No questions? Did you learn anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like how you use the green and you have the green background and you have the
That's
green.
right. Oh, by the way,
Green.
when we were in Marshfield, I showed you that picture with Marshfield with all the green. Well, I put these flyers in the racks and they think they belong there. This one here. This one? No. This one. So we put the flyer down here. So people pick it up. And by the way, the average person in these towns has no clue. They don't know anything about this.
Not anymore.
But when we tell them, the people in Dedham now know something about it. The people in Carver, the people in Marshfield. And these flyers, we designed these ourselves. We can customize these to any town and city and county. Boston is a member of the ICLEI. Where do you live?
Me?
Yeah.
Jersey.
Yeah, what town?
Lakers.
I think you're good. But if you live in Keene, New Hampshire, if you live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, if you live in Portland, Maine, let's see, Dedham, you live in Dedham, don't you? Okay, you got work to do. You're okay, you're in Norwood, you don't have it in Norwood, but a lot of states are still buying into it. And if you want to know why it's so expensive to live in your town sometimes, it's because of these policies. Okay. Something you'll have to deal with right now, but a few years from now. There are people I know who can't live in the towns they were raised. They can't afford the rents. And in most cases, they have an ICLEI in the town. All right, well, thank you. I know we're cutting it a little bit short. And there's a class upstairs, so you need to be quiet. And